Strap in, everyone, because today we are going deep on South Korean defense, specifically Hanwha Aerospace.
Yeah, they are really making some moves globally, and we're going to unpack why that is.
We've got a whole lot of sources here, like industry analysis, financial reports, and even some news articles on their latest deals.
By the end of this, you'll understand not just how they're succeeding, but why it actually matters. Big picture.
That why is key.
Yeah, Hanwha's rise is strategic, very calculated, and honestly, it's kind of fascinating to watch.
Okay, so let's start with something that might catch your ear as an investor. You know, all those headlines about South Korean defense stocks going up.
Oh, yeah.
Hanwha Aerospace was right in the middle of that. Their stock jumped over 16% at one point.
Yeah, well, that surge you're talking about, it's tied directly to what's happening with the Russia-Ukraine war. Global defense spending is way up. Countries are looking for new suppliers. They want to look outside the usual big names, and South Korea is ready. They've got the production.
They're stepping right into that gap.
Exactly.
Hanwha's not wasting any time either. They've been racking up these huge contracts like that $9.2 billion deal with Poland back in 2022. Howitzers and missile systems, all that.
Yeah, that's a big sign that things are changing in the global arms market. A lot of the traditional suppliers, they're having trouble keeping up with demand, but Hanwha's doing things differently.
So it seems like their recipe for success is pretty simple. They deliver faster, they're cheaper, and their weapons just work with NATO stuff.
You got a speed, cost, compatibility.
Yeah.
That's the Hanwha trifecta. They can get weapons out the door 1 to 2 years faster than the competition. That's huge.
Wow.
And their supply chain, it's so efficient that they can keep prices down. And they designed everything to plug right into NATO's system so there's no hassle.
It's smart. And it's not just about selling weapons either, right? They're also setting up these partnerships that usually involve making things right in the buyer's country.
Right. That's a brilliant move. It creates jobs in the buyer's country, helps their economy, and it means they don't have to rely on long, vulnerable supply chains.
Makes sense. It's a win-win.
Exactly.
Speaking of those partnerships, let's talk about Poland. That's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about a big deal here.
Yeah.
This was South Korea's biggest arms deal ever.
Yeah, this was massive. $12.4 billion in 2022, plus another $1.6 planned for 2024.
Wow.
And we're talking a whole arsenal here. Chunmoo rocket launchers, K-2 tanks, K-9 howitzers. They even got FA-50 fighter jets.
Poland's basically rebuilding their entire military with South Korean tech.
And boosting their own defense industry at the same time. That's strategic partnership in action.
Totally. Now, how does that compare to what they're doing in Germany?
It's a different story in Germany. There's definitely room for working together, especially when it comes to making things more efficient. But Hanwha's up against some major players there. The German defense giants, they're not going to give up market share easily.
Right. And then there's that whole made in Europe thing where the EU wants to keep things internal.
Yeah, that's a hurdle for anyone trying to break in from outside.
Definitely. So how are they dealing with that?
Well, they've actually found a different kind of partnership in the UK. After Brexit, the UK's got more freedom to work with countries outside the EU.
Interesting. So that UK model could be the way forward for deals with other big countries like the G20 nations.
Yeah, it's all about adapting to how global power is shifting and taking advantage of those changes.
Right. So they're playing the long game here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thinking ahead every step of the way.
Okay, let's shift gears for a minute and talk about Norway. They've had a pretty long relationship with Hanwha, starting with those K-9 Vadar howitzers back in 2017.
Norway's a good example of how these partnerships can develop over time. It started with the howitzers, but now they're working together on other important defense systems, too. It shows a real level of trust.
Yeah, for sure. And one system that's been getting a lot of attention, especially in Europe, is the Chunmoo rocket launcher. That seems like a real difference maker.
The Chunmoo is a perfect example of how adaptable Hanwha is and how they're willing to work closely with local industries. So in Poland, they've integrated it into their defense system as the hallmark, using Polish-made vehicles. It can also fire a bunch of different types of ammunition, so it's super versatile on the battlefield.
So Hanwha's really making moves all over the globe. But let's go back to that why for a second. What's driving all this momentum?
Well, Hanwha's CEO, Michael Coulter, he laid out their approach really clearly. It's about building those strong relationships with militaries and governments, working together on cutting-edge tech and setting up those local production bases for reliable supply chains. But even with all the success, there are still challenges ahead.
Oh, for sure.
Cracking the U.S. defense market, that's tough.
Yeah.
And the world keeps changing, so they have to constantly adapt and anticipate what's next. It's a high-stakes game.
It really is.
They've got competition, not just from the big players, but also from new defense industries popping up in other countries. It's a dynamic landscape. You got to stay sharp.
Yeah, you can't just rest on your laurels.
Not at all.
So they really are thinking ahead, like you said.
Yeah, they are. It's impressive. We've talked about a lot here, Poland redoing their whole military, what the EU is trying to do. But what does it all mean for the average person?
Right, someone who's not like a defense expert or a foreign policy person. Why should they care about this South Korean company doing so well in the defense industry?
That's a great question. Because at the end of the day, all these deals, all this shifting around in the arms market, it has real consequences.
It changes the balance of power in the world.
It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Right. It's about global security and stability.
So this deep dive, it's relevant because we're not just looking at some companies' profits. We're watching a whole new power dynamic emerge in a world that's becoming more and more multipolar. And South Korea, with all their technology and these partnerships, they're a big part of that.
Exactly.
So Hanwha winning, it's not just good for them, it shows how much influence South Korea is gaining in the world.
Yeah, it's a shift away from the old power structures we used to see.
And with that shift comes opportunity, but also responsibility.
For Hanwha, the opportunity is there's this huge global demand for what they're good at. But they've also got to be careful, navigate geopolitics, make sure what they're doing actually helps stabilize things, not make them worse.
It's a tough balance.
It is. And one thing that interests me about Hanwha is how adaptable they are.
Yeah.
They're not stuck on just exporting weapons. They're doing local production joint ventures, sharing technology. It's a more sophisticated approach. They get it. It's a global industry. Everything's connected.
That's right. And that network they're building, it gives them flexibility that's going to be so important as things keep changing in the world.
Especially with all this stuff happening right now. Rising tensions in different places, climate change, worries about technology being misused. I mean, the need for good defense systems, it's only going to grow.
Absolutely. In this kind of environment, companies like Hanwha with their quality products, their speed, their strategic thinking, they're going to be in high demand.
Okay, but let's bring it back to the everyday person for a second. How does all this affect someone who isn't a defense analyst or, a foreign policy wonk?
It might seem far removed, but it really does affect the security and stability of the world we all live in.
Yeah.
These weapon systems, the partnerships Hanwha is building, they could actually decide the outcome of conflicts, shape the geopolitical landscape for years to come. What seems like just a business deal can have ripple effects all over the planet.
We really are all connected. What happens in one place can have big consequences somewhere else.
Exactly. And that's why Hanwha's story is so important. It's not just about a company succeeding. It's a look into how global power is shifting and how technology is a major part of that.
It's a story that's still unfolding.
And one we need to pay attention to.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's a story with, global implications, and we need to understand it. We've seen how Hanwha Aerospace has become this major player in the defense industry, using speed, affordability, and smart partnerships to get those big wins, especially in Europe.
But they're not stopping there. They want to build a global network, use their expertise where it's needed, and set themselves up for long-term growth because the world wants this advanced defense technology more and more.
And all this is happening while South Korea is trying to become one of the top arms exporters in the world. It's changing the balance of power globally, and we're only just starting to see what that means.
What's really interesting to me about this deep dive? We've gone beyond just the headlines and the numbers. We've seen how a company's strategy can reflect a whole country's goals and how those goals can actually impact the whole world.
It shows that business isn't just about making money. It's about power influence, shaping the future. And when it comes to defense, The stakes are higher than ever.
So here's something to think about as we wrap things up.
Shoot.
As Hanwha keeps growing, how will their strategy change? Can they stay ahead of the competition? Can they handle all the uncertainty